Title: The Day the Wehrmacht Fought for America. In the last 72 hours of the Second World War in Europe, a German army major drove through the Austrian mountains under a white flag, looking for an American tank. He found one on the road outside the town of Kufstein, and he told its 27-year-old commander that he needed his help to fight the SS. Inside a medieval castle a few miles away, the former prime ministers of France were loading pistols and preparing to die alongside German soldiers they had been at war with for 5 years. The Americans, the Germans, and the French prisoners were about to fight on the same side against other Germans for control of a 13th century fortress. It was a battle that made no sense. It broke every rule of a war that had already broken all of them. It was not a fight for territory, or for strategy, or for a nation's survival. It was a fight for a handful of lives, in a place the war had forgotten, at the exact moment the world was changing forever. This is the story of a captain who made an impossible choice, a major who betrayed his own side to do the right thing, and a battle that should never have happened. The first week of May 1945 was not an end, but a collapse. The Third Reich was dissolving in real time. Adolf Hitler was dead in a Berlin bunker. German armies were surrendering by the tens of thousands across the continent, but others were not. Fanatical units of the Waffen-SS, men who had known nothing but the party and the war, still roamed the countryside, fighting, killing, and carrying out final orders. They answered to no one. They were accountable for nothing. They were the last ghosts of a dying empire, and they were more dangerous than ever. High in the Austrian Alps, on a wooded hill overlooking the Brixental Valley, stood Itter Castle. For centuries it had been a fortress. Now it was a prison. But it was a prison of a very particular kind. Its inmates were not common criminals or prisoners of war. They were the Ehrenhäftlinge, the prisoners of honor. They were a collection of France's most powerful men, swept up after the German invasion of 1940 and held ever since as political bargaining chips. There was Édouard Daladier, who had signed the Munich Agreement. There was Paul Reynaud, the prime minister who had refused to surrender. There were generals, labor leaders, and even a tennis star. They were old men, mostly. They were political rivals who had spent years trying to destroy each other's careers, now forced to share a dining hall. Their guards were not SS fanatics. They were older soldiers from the regular German army, the Wehrmacht, men who were more like tired wardens than true believers. For years, a strange, quiet routine had settled over the castle, but in the last days of April, that routine shattered. The commandant of the prison fled, the guards grew nervous, and everyone in the castle knew one thing for certain: the SS would be coming for them. To the SS, these men were not valuable prisoners. They were traitors and symbols of the old world, and they were to be executed before the Americans arrived. The man who changed everything was not a soldier. He was a captured Yugoslav handyman named Zvonimir Chuchkovic. On the 2nd of May, he slipped out of the castle with a letter from the prisoners and a promise to find help. He biked for miles through the chaos of the collapsing front, dodging SS patrols, until he reached the nearest town and delivered his message to the first organized troops he could find. They were not Americans. They were a small unit of the German Wehrmacht, commanded by a 40-year-old major named Josef Gangl. Gangl was a professional soldier, a veteran of Stalingrad, and a man whose loyalty to the Nazi regime had long since evaporated. He was now focused only on saving his men from the SS and surrendering to the approaching Americans. When he heard about the French prisoners in the castle, he saw not an enemy problem, but a human one. He knew the SS would butcher them. He made a decision that was, in the context of his entire life and the war he had fought, an act of treason. He vowed to protect the prisoners, but he had only a dozen men. He knew he could not fight the SS alone. He needed the one thing he had spent 6 years fighting against, an American army. So Major Gangl tied a white cloth to his staff car and drove west, toward the sound of American guns. He found them on a bridge outside the town of Kufstein, a column of Sherman tanks from the 12th Armored Division. In the lead tank sat Captain John C. Jack Lee Jr. Lee was 27 years old, tired, and had seen enough strange things in this war to last a lifetime, but he had never seen this. A German major, walking calmly toward his tank, saluting, and asking in perfect English for permission to come aboard. Gangl laid out the situation. He told Lee about the prisoners, the castle, and the SS closing in. He offered his own men, his knowledge of the terrain, and his life, if the Americans would help him defend the castle. Lee listened. He had no orders to do this. He had no authority to form an alliance with a German officer. His mission was to push forward, accept surrenders, and finish the war. An attack on a castle full of SS to save French politicians, alongside Wehrmacht soldiers, was not in any manual. It was insane. Lee looked at the German major. He saw a man who was telling the truth. He made his choice in less than a minute. He agreed. He took his own tank, Basot and Jenny, a handful of GIs, and followed Gangl back toward the mountains. He was officially going on an unauthorized rescue mission, with a Wehrmacht officer as his guide. When they reached Itter Castle, the scene was surreal. The remaining Wehrmacht soldiers greeted the Americans not as conquerors, but as reinforcements. Major Gangl formally introduced Captain Lee to the French prisoners, who emerged blinking into the courtyard. Paul Reynaud, the former Prime Minister of France, shook the hand of a young American tank captain from New York. There was no time for ceremony. An SS reconnaissance patrol had already been spotted. The defense had to be organized immediately. It was a force that defied belief. A handful of American GIs, a dozen German Wehrmacht soldiers who had just ripped the Nazi eagle and swastika patches from their uniforms, and the French prisoners themselves, some of whom were decorated generals. General Weygand helped direct the placement of machine guns. Paul Reynaud stood watch on the battlements. They had one Sherman tank parked at the main gate. They had rifles, a few machine guns, and a shared, desperate understanding that if the castle fell, everyone inside it would be shot. American, German, and French alike. They did not have to wait long. At 4 a.m. on the 5th of May, the attack began. Up to 150 men of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division assaulted the castle from all sides. The night exploded with the sound of machine gun fire and mortar rounds. Inside the walls, the defenders returned fire. The sound of American M1 Garands mixed with the crack of German Kar 98K rifles and the steady thump of a Wehrmacht MG42 machine gun, all firing at the same enemy. Captain Lee commanded the defense from the castle keep, running from wall to wall, directing his tiny, international army. Major Gangl fought alongside him, a German officer taking orders from an American captain. The French prisoners, men in their 60s and 70s, shuttled ammunition and helped the wounded. At the gate, Lee's Sherman tank held the main road, its 75mm cannon blasting holes in the SS lines until a German 88mm shell struck it, setting it on fire. The crew bailed out, and the castle's heaviest weapon was gone. The fight raged for hours. Ammunition ran low. The defenders fell back from the outer walls to the keep itself. The SS brought up anti-tank rockets and began punching holes in the ancient stone walls. Lee knew they could not hold out. He was on the radio, screaming for reinforcements, but the signal was weak. In the middle of the fighting, Major Gangl ran across an open courtyard to move Paul Reynaud to a safer position. An SS sniper's bullet caught him in the open. He died instantly, a German major killed while fighting for the American army. By mid-morning, it was over. The defenders were down to their last few clips of ammunition. The SS were massing for a final charge to breach the main gate. Lee told his men to get ready to fight hand to hand, and then, through the noise of the battle, they heard it. A new sound, the rumble of heavy engines. Another column of Sherman tanks, the relief force Lee had been calling for, came roaring up the road. The SS, caught between the castle and the fresh American armor, broke and fled into the woods. The battle for Castle Itter was over. The prisoners were safe. A handful of American soldiers and German soldiers stood together on the battlements, covered in dust and gunpowder, and watched the last of the SS disappear. 2 days later, all German forces in Europe surrendered unconditionally. The war was finished.